Hello dear children, welcome back to economics session. This is the third part of our IED chapter, employment. So employment in firms, factories and offices. First we have to understand the distribution of workforce by the industrial sectors. In the course of economic development of a country, labor flows from agriculture and other related activities to industry and services. In this process, workers migrate from rural to urban areas. Eventually, at a much later stage, the industrial sector begins to lose its share of total employment as the service sector enters a period of rapid expansion. And this shift can be understood by looking at the distribution of workers by the industry. Generally, we divide all economic activities into 8 different industrial divisions. They are agriculture, mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water supply, construction, trade, transport and storage, services, etc. And for simplicity, all the working persons engaged in these divisions can be clubbed into 3 major sectors, that is primary, secondary and the tertiary sector. A pie diagram and a schedule is given here for the distribution of workforce by industry in 2011-12. So in the primary sector, that include agriculture, and primary sector is the main source of employment for majority of workers in India. About 49% of workers are engaged in the primary sector. About 64% of the workforce in rural India depends on agriculture, forestry and fishing. And agriculture is not a major source of employment in urban areas where people are mainly engaged in the service sector. You can see that from that schedule. In rural areas, though both men and women workers are concentrated in the primary sector, women workers' contribution or concentration is very high there. About 63% of female workforce is employed in the primary sector, whereas less than half of males work in that sector. And men get opportunities in both secondary and service sectors. So now moving to the secondary sector, it includes mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water supply, construction, etc. So the secondary sector provides employment to only 24% of workforce in India. The secondary sector gives employment to about 35% of urban workforce, and about 20% of rural workers are working in manufacturing industries, construction and other industrial activities. Now the tertiary sector or the service sector, it includes trade, transport, storage and services. About 27% of workers are in the service sector. About 60% of urban workers are in the service sector, and the service sector provides employment to only about 16% of rural workers. Now moving to the growth and changing structure of employment. The indicators of economic development. There are 2 developmental indicators. First one is growth of employment and the second one the growth of gross domestic product, that is GDP. We already studied GDP in national income and related aggregates. So India's planned development have been aimed at the expansion of the economy through increase in GDP and employment. And we know that expansion in employment and GDP is very essential for a country's economic growth and development, and there is a line graph given here showing the growth of employment and the growth of gross domestic product GDP during 1951 to 2012 in percentage, and the blue line represent GDP and the pink represents the employment. So during the period of 1950 to 2010, the gross domestic product of India grew positively and was higher than the employment growth. And during this period, employment grew at the rate of not more than 2%. However, there was always fluctuation in the growth of GDP, and there is a widening gap between the growth of GDP and employment during 1951 to 2012. This means that in the Indian economy, without generating employment, we have been able to produce more goods and services, and the scholars refers to this phenomenon as jobless growth. No, what is jobless growth? The widening gap between the growth of GDP and employment. That means we are creating or producing more and more goods and services without generating any employment, and that is jobless growth. And now, how the growth pattern of employment and GDP affected the different sections of workforce. A major section of population lives in rural areas and is dependent on agriculture as their main livelihood. The developmental strategies in India have aimed at reducing the proportion of people depending on agriculture. The distribution of workforce by industrial sectors shows a substantial shift from farm work to non-farm work, and this is shown in the table, that is trends in employment pattern, that is sector wise, primary, secondary and the service sector during 1972 to 2012. And we can see clearly the substantial development or the substantial variation from the farm work to non-farm work. So in 1972-73, about 74% of workforce was engaged in primary sector, and in 2011-12, this proportion has declined to about 50%. The secondary and service sectors are showing promising future for Indian workforce as shares of these sectors have increased from 11 to 24% and 15 to 27% respectively during 1972 to 2012. The distribution of workforce in different status indicates that over the last 4 decades, people have moved from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work. Yet, self-employment continues to be the major employment provider. So, the process of moving from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work as casualization of workforce. This makes the workers highly vulnerable. So, what is casualization of workforce? The process of moving from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work. This is known as casualization of workforce.